Fox News polls since Donald Trump won the election. This is Special Report. Good evening, welcome to Washington. I'm Bret Baier. Americans have not yet made up their minds what to really think about President-elect Donald Trump. That is the takeaway from our brand new Fox polls. Our first survey since Trump upset Hillary Clinton to win the White House. 59% say they are hopeful following the election, but 31% believe Donald Trump's presidency will be one of the worst in history. The president-elect appears to be closing in on some of the empty spaces in his cabinet tonight, and he is coming off a summit with some of the people who were his strongest detractors during the campaign. Senior national correspondent John Roberts is outside Trump Tower again tonight. Good evening, John.
Bret, good evening to you. It was the highest profile summit yet at Trump Tower, which is directly behind this bus behind me, and also the highest dollar as Donald Trump played host to high-tech billionaires, most of whom actively campaigned against him in the election.
Well, I just want to thank everybody.
It was a crowd that just weeks ago had been openly hostile to Donald Trump. Amazon founder Jeff Bezos, who during the campaign claimed Trump was eroding the democratic process. Apple CEO Tim Cook, who raised millions for Hillary Clinton. Facebook COO Sheryl Sandberg also backed Hillary Clinton, as did Tesla and SpaceX founder Elon Musk. Today, Trump urged them all to put political differences aside and focus on growing the economy, pointing out tech stocks have been doing pretty well since he won the election.
You're doing well right now, and I'm very honored by the bounce. They're all talking about the bounce, so right now everybody in the Zoom has to like me at least a little bit.
There was no comment on that from the CEOs, who all refused to talk to the press on the way out. Curiously absent from the summit, Twitter, a transition source saying, quote, "They aren't big enough." Donald Trump is getting closer to filling out his cabinet, this morning making official his pick of former Texas Governor Rick Perry to head up energy. Perry, a strong proponent of fossil fuels, is drawing fire from the left, but Perry was also heavily invested in renewable energy sources while governor. With Montana Congressman Ryan Zinke expected to soon be named Secretary of the Interior, that leaves only agriculture and Veterans Affairs open. Filling those slots is proving problematic. Transition sources tell Fox News Trump wants North Dakota Democratic Senator Heidi Heitkamp for agriculture. But because she would likely be replaced by a Republican, Democrats have put on a full-court press, urging her to say no. Also in the running is South Dakota Republican Congresswoman Kristi Noem. While she has said she'd prefer to stay in Congress, she might have a difficult time declining if Trump asked. Veterans Affairs, according to a senior source, is, quote, very tough to fill. Trump has promised to completely revamp the structure and culture of the VA. That will require a unique candidate. Another issue that's rising on Donald Trump's radar, Democrats insist government rules prohibit him from maintaining an ownership in his brand new Washington hotel at the old post office. They say when he becomes president, he'll have to divest himself of that signature property. Transition officials said today that Donald Trump will address all of that when he outlines his plans to separate himself from his businesses at a press conference that should likely happen sometime in early January. Bret?
A fine wine. John Roberts outside Trump Tower. John, thank you. The Obama administration is trying to reinforce its scientific or ideological firewall around the finding that global warming exists and is man-made. The president's outgoing Interior Secretary today had one last call to arms to the true believers and concern about the president-elect's administration coming in. Correspondent Kevin Cork has the story tonight from the White House.
Speak up. That's the word from Interior Secretary Sally Jewell, imploring scientists to confront so-called climate change deniers, especially if President-elect Donald Trump tries to sideline climate research.
Make your voices heard and make them relevant to the people that you're talking to. We have a president-elect who likes to win. We cannot win without good science.
Jewell, the Obama administration's top steward for public lands, said the warning was in response to the words of the president-elect himself, who has since tempered his skepticism, but on a number of occasions called climate change a hoax.
I think it's a big scam for a lot of people to make a lot of money. In the meantime, China is eating our lunch because they don't partake in all of the rules and regulations that we do.
Critics have expressed concern that the Trump administration will be more protective of the interest of big energy than the the environment, noting that his choices to run state, energy, and the Environmental Protection Agency all have ties to oil-producing states. Moreover, Scott Pruitt, Trump's EPA administrator pick, has even questioned climate change itself.
Well, I think that the president's view is that policymaking should be guided by science. And that policymakers should be listening to scientists, both inside the government and outside the government.
Adding to the White House's concerns, reports of a request by the president-elect's team for the names of the Energy Department staff and contractors who worked on the Obama administration's efforts to reduce carbon emissions, a survey since disavowed by the Trump transition team.
There should be real apprehension across the country that our clean energy revolution, our efficiency revolution, our fight for clean air and clean water are going to be under assault from the minute he takes the oath of office.
By the way, Bret, the Trump team says the person that sent out that survey has since been properly counseled. It's also important to point out that they are expected to take a very fresh look at a number of Obama administration policies as far as the energy environment is concerned, including the Paris Climate Accord and the Keystone and Dakota Access pipelines. In the process, they may open up a number of frontiers for energy development and finally change 8 years of accepting climate change as science fact instead of something that should be up for debate. Bret?
Kevin Cork live on the North Lawn. Kevin, thank you. Yahoo says it believes hackers stole data from more than 1 billion user accounts in August of 2013, billion with a B. The company says it is different from a breach than the one it disclosed in September when it said 500 million accounts were exposed. Yahoo says the information stolen may include names, email addresses, phone numbers, birth dates, and security questions and answers. The company says it believes bank account information and payment card data were not affected. The Federal Reserve today raised its key interest rate by 1/4 point. It's the first such move in a year. Fed Chair Janet Yellen says it is due to an improving economy.
Modest increase in the federal funds rate is appropriate in light of the solid progress we have seen toward our goals of maximum employment and 2% inflation. We continue to expect that the evolution of the economy will warrant only gradual increases in the federal funds rate over time.
Stocks declined on the news that the Fed may make 3 more rate hikes next year. The Dow dropped 119, the S&P 500 was off 18, the Nasdaq fell 27. Now joining us from our sister network, Fox Business Network's Melissa Francis. Good evening, Melissa. So why did the rate hike, or the talk of more rate hikes, spook the market today?
Yeah, it was really about that idea of Janet Yellen saying that we might be raising rates 3 more times in the year. Investors had expected the Federal Reserve to say that maybe it would be 2 more times. But, you know, I would caution investors out there. They promised a number of rate hikes within a year in the past, and they haven't followed through. So it's certainly not certain that it's going to happen.
What does it mean for the average person? A lot of people hear the Fed did this, the Fed did that. What does it mean to people sitting at home?
Well, if you have credit card debt, that's usually very much affected by this. That's where you see these interest rates really translate. If you have a home mortgage that's adjustable, you're thinking about going out and getting a mortgage, it should impact that. But about a year ago, the Federal Reserve raised rates, and actually mortgages went down, and investors and homeowners had one more time to go out there and refinance, although a lot of people think this time we will really see it reflected through all interest rates, mainly because she's very much promised to follow through.
You know, I've heard it explained that it's like pumping money into the market, and at some point they have to turn off the spigot. So why now? Why is this the second time they've raised the rate since 2006?
Well, there's a lot of different theories about that, and many people think that Janet Yellen, that they're all late to the game on this one, that they should have raised the rates a while ago. She said herself that she feels like the economy has gotten stronger, that the consumer is feeling better, that we've seen employment at a higher rate, that the economy can finally handle it. Some people, though, and they even asked this question at the news conference afterwards, does this have more to do with Donald Trump? And she said that some policymakers may be looking at that and thinking about the fact that he's promised to lower taxes and spend a lot on defense, and this is preemptive, and that the economy would heat up in the light of that and could really start growing, and maybe she wants to rein things in before we see that growth. She herself said, though, that they're operating under a cloud of uncertainty at the moment since they don't know for sure what Donald Trump is going to do. But this could be a little bit of a Trump effect in there.
All right, Melissa, and we'll see if we get to 20K this week. Thank you.
We'll see. Yeah.
Venezuelans are trying to deposit or spend currency that is about to become worthless. Embattled President Nicolas Maduro declared over the weekend that he was taking the country's largest denominated, most commonly used bill, the 100 Bolivar note, out of circulation. Venezuela is in a long economic crisis we've reported on before and struggling with the world's highest inflation. People have been lining up outside banks since Tuesday morning. We'll continue to follow the situation there. There is considerable confusion tonight about whether the on-again, off-again truce in Aleppo, Syria is on again. Late this afternoon, Syrian rebels said it was, but ceasefires like this have come and gone before without much success. Tonight, correspondent Rich Edson is at the White House looking at where we are right now in the war in Syria and what's next. A warning here, though. Some of the images in this report may be disturbing.
This is what ceasefire agreements look like in Aleppo, Syria.
Look how they killed my child. Why, my brother? Why?
These buses were to evacuate rebels and civilians. Instead, they're idle and empty. Russia, Turkey, and rebel forces had agreed to allow fighters and civilians to evacuate Aleppo, returning control of the city to Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. Syrian government forces have resumed bombing rebel-held territory in Aleppo as Assad's Russian-backed regime and its Iranian allies capture more of the city.
Symbolically, it means that a city that they've struggled to besiege and to encircle and to take for years now is finally theirs.
The United Nations claims pro-government forces have killed dozens of civilians. There are reports of suicides, citizens preferring that over capture by Syrian troops. In more than 5 years of fighting, hundreds of thousands of Syrians are dead, killed as several nations, rebel groups, and terrorist organizations converged on this country. In 2011, it began with hope. Syria joined the Arab Spring, citizens mobilizing to overthrow their oppressive governments. Assad responded with a violent crackdown. The country fell into civil war, with terrorist groups joining the fight to secure Syrian territory of their own. That summer, the Obama administration declared Assad must step aside. A year later, this threat.
A red line for us is we start seeing a whole bunch of chemical weapons moving around or being utilized.
Another year later, Assad's forces killed 1,400 near Damascus using sarin gas. Obama decided to walk back from his threat and pursue diplomacy with Assad's ally, Russia. That diplomacy has turned to disgust.
The idea that you would target a playground and bomb kids, hoping that you would then convince people to give up because you'd killed their kids? What kind of a sick mind comes up with a strategy like that? And what kind of civilized country is going to support those tactics? But that's what Russia has done.
And now questions of whether the administration should have engaged further in Syria, beyond airstrikes against ISIS.
There has never been a recognition that civilian population protection is at the heart of avoiding and fighting extremism. Our failure to protect the Syrian population is, I think, the biggest policy failure we did.
As President Obama's term concludes, Syria will be a question for the Trump administration, as it will now decide whether and how to engage Russia and continue U.S. involvement in Syria. Bret?
Rich Edson in the White House briefing room. Rich, thank you. The Marine Corps is grounding its fleet of MV-22 Osprey aircraft in Japan following a crash off the coast of Japan earlier this week. It happened while the tilt rotor plane was conducting a nighttime mid-air refueling operation. The 5 crew members aboard the plane were all rescued. It is the 8th crash incident involving Marine aircraft this year. A new theory tonight on how Russian hackers allegedly got into the Hillary Clinton campaign email system. The Daily Mail reports a typo in an email from one of Clinton's top aides may have been responsible for opening a digital door. Meantime, the House Intelligence Committee abruptly canceled Thursday's briefing on the alleged Russian election hacks. Fox News is told that the intel agencies, the CIA, FBI, NSA, ODNI, all refused to provide briefers, which is unusual given that this is the most senior committee with jurisdiction. The Russian scandal has put the spotlight on our country's aging IT infrastructure, and not just the equipment. You might be shocked to learn just how many of the men and women charged with keeping our government's computers safe and effective are among the country's oldest workers. Correspondent Peter Ducey tells us more tonight.
During the presidential campaign season, there was a lot of talk about who should have his or her finger on the button that controls the nation's nuclear arsenal. Well, turns out that nuclear arsenal is partly coordinated using an 8-inch floppy disk.
Where do you buy a floppy disk? I mean, I can't imagine what the price is now. And so that's the big threat, is this slow, grinding, lower quality, higher cost set of services.
The cost of caring for such ancient equipment is now so high, the feds don't have much money left over for anything else. Among the biggest spenders on IT, according to the Partnership for Public Service and Accenture, HHS at $13 billion a year, DHS at more than $6 billion a year, and the VA at nearly $4.5 billion a year.
The federal government spends almost $90 billion a year on information technology, and almost 80% of that is spent on operations and maintenance, servicing systems that may be over 50 years old.
The workforce is aging too. There are now more federal IT employees over 60 than there are under 30. At HUD, 23% of IT workers are over 60. At the National Science Foundation, 18%. And at Labor, 17%, which could become a problem whenever they decide to leave.
There are a lot of folks that are retirement eligible that will be leaving in the near term. The real question is, are we going to be able to attract the best talent to come in to fill those places, and bluntly to do things differently than we've been doing in the past.
And cost isn't the only concern as the government brainstorms ways to convince top tech talent to work for them. Experts warn the nation's cyber infrastructure remains exposed to hackers.
We don't have enough cybersecurity experts in this country. We need about 30,000 to thwart the worst kind of attack on this country. We've only got about 1,000.
Experts are waiting to see how the next president addresses the aging IT infrastructure, but private sector companies don't have to wait for anything, like IBM, whose CEO says the company is trying to adjust to changes in tech by hiring thousands of what she calls new-collar workers who don't necessarily even need college degrees. Bret?
Peter, thank you. Up next, why some people are worried a President Donald Trump has interesting communication plans. First, here's what some of our Fox News affiliates around the country are covering tonight. Fox Carolina in Greenville, as lawyers for the man accused of killing 9 black parishioners at a South Carolina church rest their case without calling any witnesses. Earlier, a judge ruled they could not present evidence about Dylan Roof's mental health. Closing arguments are planned for tomorrow. Fox 8 in High Point, North Carolina, with the firing of a Wake Forest University football announcer accused of giving sensitive information to the team's opponents. Tommy Elrod is a former player for the school and was also a coach for 11 seasons. He was not retained when the current coach took over. And this is a live look at San Francisco from our affiliate Fox 2. One of the big stories there tonight, Uber put some of its self-driving cars into service there. It's an expansion of the pilot program that started in Pittsburgh in September. An Uber employee is still behind the wheel to take over in case there's a problem here. Customers can opt out if they prefer a human driver. Would you? That's tonight's live look outside the Beltway from Special Report. We'll be right back. Tonight we continue our series on the first 100 days of the Donald Trump presidency with one of his signature campaign rallying points. Early and often, the Republican nominee took aim at President Obama's legacy nuclear deal with Iran. But Trump also hinted he would not just tear up that deal. So now the question is, what will the new president do about the nuclear deal, and is there room for a détente with Iran beyond the deal? Chief Washington correspondent James Rosen reports.
Born in Iran, an accomplished lecturer and the author of 3 books in Farsi, now an American citizen practicing law in the States, Ali Reza Alan Parsa sees some prospects under the next president for improved relations between Washington and his ancestral Persian homeland.
If nothing else, Mr. Trump, he does represent American pragmatism. He will cut deals, he will sit down with, friend and foe, and try to come up with the best deals.
In the years since the Iranian regime brutally suppressed the street protests of of June 2009, the United States, joined by 5 other world powers, negotiated and implemented a landmark deal curbing the regime's vast nuclear program while providing it with tens of billions in sanctions relief, including huge infusions of cash and access to U.S. dollar transactions. At the same time, Iran's military has harassed American warships in the Persian Gulf, detained U.S. sailors at gunpoint, ramped up ballistic missile testing, intervened militarily to prop up the Assad regime in Syria, continued funding Hamas and Hezbollah, and reaffirmed undying hostility to the nation it still calls the Great Satan. Most analysts believe that in his first 100 days in office, the next president will make some swift demonstration of his commitment to changing the U.S.-Iranian relationship. The nuclear accord, now at the heart of that relationship, having never been ratified by Congress, is at once the easiest thing to change and the most far-reaching. And as a candidate, Donald Trump criticized it bitterly.
This is one of the worst deals ever made by any country in history. The deal with Iran will lead to nuclear problems. All they have to do is sit back 10 years, and they don't have to do much, and they're going to end up getting nuclear.
But he has also signaled he doesn't intend to just walk away from the deal.
It's very tough to do when you say rip up a deal, because I'm a deal person, but I will police that deal. You know, I've taken over some bad contracts. I would police that contract so tough that they don't have a chance. As bad as the contract is, I will be so tough on that contract.
The Secretary of State who negotiated the Iran deal hinted to reporters in Brussels last week that President Obama, in attempting to persuade his successor not to scrap the deal, made some headway.
And that there was a sense in that conversation, without violating any of it, that there were aspects of it that are constructive and positive and worthwhile and maybe should be held on to.
Iran's president has warned Tehran will not allow Mr. Trump to weaken or abandon the deal. The State Department was forced to acknowledge Iran has no such power.
And of course, no one else can prevent any other party to this agreement from walking away. The counter-argument to that is, why would anyone walk away? Because it's effective.
Outside of the nuclear deal, it is the raging civil war and humanitarian catastrophe in Syria that may offer the next president his clearest avenue for cooperation with Iran. After all, the Iranian military is coordinating closely with Russia in Syria, and the president-elect has vowed to work with the Kremlin to resolve that conflict. And Alan Parsa, for one, believes Mr. Trump may recognize a bit of himself in his adversaries in Tehran.
Because Iranians have shown themselves to be rather pragmatic in many areas, and as Mr. Trump himself has said, they're good deal makers too.
Even if he intends to quiet things down between the U.S. and Iran, Mr. Trump will soon find his hand forced by events. Members of Congress have proposed close to 36 sanctions bills, and the new president will have to issue fresh waivers for the nuclear deal to continue, Bret, if, of course, Mr. Trump is of a mind to keep it.
Could get sticky. James, thank you. Our 15-part series looking ahead to the first 100 days of the Trump presidency continues tomorrow with the president-elect's plans for tax cuts and simplification of the tax code. If you miss any of the reports, you can check them all out on foxnews.com/special report. President-elect Trump's critics have something new to worry about tonight. It involves the federal government's decades-old effort to spread American democracy to other nations through the media. Fox News media analyst and host of Fox's Media Buzz, Howard Kurtz, is here tonight with some big changes for agencies such as the Voice of America. Good evening, Howie. What's this uproar all about?
Bret, Politico says that Trump will take over an office that could turn into an unfettered propaganda arm, a kind of Trump TV that could peddle only Trump-approved content. A Washington Post editorial said Trump could name the editor of Breitbart News or another alt-right propagandist to control how the U.S. is presented to the rest of the world. Now, we're talking here about naming a single chief executive to oversee the VOA, Radio Free Europe, and other government communications agencies that currently are battling such forces as ISIS propaganda and Russian cyber hacking.
But what's new about that? I mean, haven't they been around for decades?
Yes, indeed. But a new law is eliminating the Broadcasting Board of Governors, an agency that's been widely criticized as ineffective in managing these communications agencies, and replacing it with a single CEO. Now, that change was supported by President Obama's administration, President's chairman at the Board of Governors, the top Democrat on the House Foreign Affairs Committee, among others. The Senate, by the way, could approve or reject anybody that Trump nominated. I spoke to the committee chairman, Ed Royce, and I asked him about the furor.
I think that's hysteria. As a matter of fact, there's very clear laws in place here in this legislation which put in a firewall in terms of journalistic independence. So in fact, what's driving this is opposition from the bureaucracy itself.
Meanwhile, Bret, Hillary Clinton herself, as Secretary of State, testified that the Broadcasting Board of Governors was practically defunct, her words, in terms of being able to sell a message to the world. Now, Congressman Royce introduced this legislation last year with bipartisan support, virtually no news coverage. Only since Trump's election have the news organizations seized on it, suggesting possibly a double standard.
There you go, Howie. Thank you. Thanks. The election of Donald Trump has many in the United Nations worried about big changes in the U.S. attitude toward that organization. President-elect Trump has made no secret of his disdain for the UN, and the global group has just sworn in a new Secretary General who is promising what he calls management reform. Senior correspondent Eric Shawn looks at that situation tonight.
The United Nations is not a friend of democracy. It's not a friend to freedom. It's not a friend even to the United States of America.
Donald Trump, clearly no fan of the United Nations. The president-elect's views are at odds with the world body on a variety of pressing issues, from its support of the Iran nuclear deal, climate change initiatives, and resettling refugees.
The overwhelming feeling among most members was that Barack Obama was their kind of U.S. president, so I think it will be a different reception. But I think the whole point of the idea of making America great again is to reassert ourselves, especially in bodies like the United Nations.
Former UN Ambassador John Bolton, who served Republican President George W. Bush and has talked to Mr. Trump about joining the administration, predicts the president-elect will take a hard stance at the UN. He says the almost $3 billion American taxpayers paid this year alone, the most of any nation, could be cut.
I think a good hard look at the UN budget is long overdue, and I wouldn't be at all surprised if a President Trump, once in office, does pay particular attention to it.
It's total insanity.
That was the undiplomatic opinion of Mr. Trump a decade ago, when we sat down to discuss the UN headquarters' multi-billion-dollar renovation. He testified about it to Congress and accused the UN of overspending.
It is either the most corrupt thing going on in the world, which is saying something, or it's one of the most incompetent things I've ever seen.
Mr. Trump has tapped Republican South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley as his choice for UN ambassador.
I think there's a lot of day-to-day issues that she doesn't know about. Right? And the problem that Nikki Haley is going to face is that many of the other countries' delegates are people that have been there for a very long time. Like her counterpart from Russia has been there for 10 years.
A possible preview of what Governor Haley could face came in a September speech by the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. He compared the rhetoric from Mr. Trump and others that he called, quote, populists, demagogues, and clever cheats to the propaganda of ISIS. Bret?
Eric, thank you. Some breaking news now. The House Intelligence Committee chairman is not happy at all that the intelligence agencies have refused to provide anybody for that committee hearing on alleged Russian hacking. Devin Nunes releasing a statement, the chairman of the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. It is unacceptable that the intelligence community directors would not fulfill the House Intelligence Committee's request to be briefed tomorrow on the cyber attacks that occurred during the presidential campaign. The legislative branch is constitutionally vested with oversight responsibility of executive branch agencies, which are obligated to comply with our requests. Continuing, the committee is deeply concerned that intransigence in sharing intelligence with Congress can enable the manipulation of intelligence for political purposes. We will talk about more of this with the panel in just a moment. Many of you are hopeful and optimistic. Some of you are scared. We will talk about all of the Fox News polls as well, since Donald Trump won the election, and that breaking news about the intelligence agencies giving the stiff arm to the House Intelligence Committee. And the panel joins me after a break.
Should we have our hair on fire that hacking took place? No, I mean, that's what happens. If he can discredit the integrity of what we do here in the voting process and electing folks, he is winning.
We have the President-elect of the United States publicly condemning the intelligence services on which he will have to rely as president. If I'm running that covert action, I'm putting it in the wind column.
It's quite possible that the Republican Party has been exploited, and Donald Trump himself might have been exploited over the years by Russian intelligence.
So a lot of talk about the alleged hacking and what it meant for the election, as the breaking news we just brought to you that the intel agencies are not providing any briefers to the House Intelligence Committee, and the chairman, Devin Nunes, being very upset about that. This is some new Fox News polls are coming out on this issue. Russia's attempts to influence the 2016 presidential election helped Donald Trump, and there you see all voters 32%, Hillary Clinton 1%, no effect 59%. Of course, Clinton voters a much different take on all of that. Donald Trump's dealings with China and Russia, and here you see the breakdown in the Fox poll about that. Too accommodating to Russia, 50%. Too confrontational with China, 43%. Interesting findings there. Finally, overall, the opinion of Donald Trump as it stands now, according to our latest polls, favorable, unfavorable, 47-51. And you can see a big jump as far as where it stood at the beginning of November at election time. Let's bring in our panel. Steve Hayes, senior writer for the Weekly Standard. Mara Liasson, national political correspondent of National Public Radio, and Guy Benson, political editor at townhall.com. Charles Hurt, political columnist for the Washington Times. Steve, first of all, congratulations. We should have changed it. You have a new title.
I do have a new title.
And said title is?
Editor-in-Chief of the Weekly Standard.
Thank you very much. We will put that up. Congratulations. The thoughts about the Nunes development and the fact that the intel agencies are not providing briefings to what he wanted, a hearing on this Russian hacking.
Yeah, pretty extraordinary that they would deny briefings, and from what I understand, it was a denial of the requested briefings rather than just not being responsive. They have said no, they're not going to provide the briefings. You know, the statement that you read from Devin Nunes, I mean, he's not somebody who's sort of prone to anger. That was steaming anger coming from Devin Nunes, especially the suggestion that this could be the politicization or the manipulation of intelligence. And I think the context here is that you've seen in the minds of many Republicans, including many on the oversight committees, politicization of intelligence over the years, particularly at the CIA throughout the Obama administration. If you look back at the kinds of intelligence product that the CIA was providing to the president, it was consistent with what the president wanted to be true, particularly with respect to Al-Qaeda, ISIS, the war on terror. So they were providing intelligence product that was fit to match with the president's ideological conclusions. The concern is that that's what's taking place again here. And I think if the CIA or people at the CIA are going to be leaking these kinds of accusations, they have an obligation to go before the congressional oversight committees and explain themselves. Now, having said all of that, these are very serious claims, and I think there are some people who are defending the Trump administration or conservatives who aren't being serious enough about the potential Russian intervention in a U.S. election.
Okay, Mara. So here you have this story. The Washington Post does it first that that CIA believes that the Russians hacked in order to help Donald Trump. You have clearly some intel agencies that are not on the same page when it comes to this.
Right.
Now, Nunes is trying to figure this out, okay? And he calls this committee hearing and gets the Heisman Award from the intel agencies. We're not going. Now, how are the electors who are asking for intel briefings to feel confident about, you know, that's...
Yeah, that to me is inexplicable, because put aside the dissension about the motive, there is one thing that is almost unanimous, which is Russia hacked. Russia interfered in our election, as you just heard Michael Hayden say, in order to sow doubts among Americans about their own electoral process. And that's a real cyber attack, and it's really serious. And that's something that Donald Trump, so far the only prominent American that we know of who has completely rejected that finding, that Russia hacked. As a matter of fact, you know, he said it could have been a 400-pound guy sitting somewhere. Lindsey Graham said today it might have been a 400-pound guy, but it was a 400-pound Russian guy. But I think that, I don't know why they didn't brief. They're going to have to, because they're going to be hearings on this.
Okay.
They're going to be hearings on this. They're going to have to brief them. They briefed them in October. They briefed Congress in October.
They briefed November 17th. Here is the Director of National Intelligence, Clapper.
As far as the WikiLeaks
connection. The evidence there is not as strong, and we don't have good insight into the sequencing of the releases or when the data may have been provided.
Is he off script there, Guy? Is it what's going on?
Who knows? Anyone's guess is as good as mine. And I think that there has to be an answer here from the intelligence community. When you're brought forward and Congress asks to hear from you and the relevant oversight committee wants to hear, you know, there's a lot of noise out there. There's a lot of allegations flying back and forth. The motives are unclear, differences in opinion among various agencies. When Congress asks you to show up and explain yourself on some level and you say no, the American people have to ask a question. I don't care if you're a Republican or a Democrat, why on earth can they say that? Not just why are they saying it, why can they say that? At some point, they need to show up and answer questions.
Meantime, the White House, the president, in several interviews, Josh Earnest from the podium, is getting a little bit more aggressive when it comes to this topic.
A whole lot more, and I think that's a very important thing to remember, because obviously the accusations are very serious. If Russia attempted or succeeded in any way to sort of interfere with our American elections, that's a very serious issue, and we need to get to the bottom of it without fear or favor of any politician. But on the other hand, you do have a sitting president right now who should be overseeing all of this, and he's not doing much to help add clarity to all of it. And I can't help but get the feeling that that he himself has contributed to the politicization of the intelligence.
I want to get to a couple of these polls, ones that you find interesting. I just want to mention two. One, Fox News poll 1, how will history judge Donald Trump's presidency? And you see the breakdown. One of the greatest, 11% above average. There you see it. One of the worst, 31% according to this poll. Number 3, describe the election outcome feelings. 59% say hopeful. 50% said relieved. I think a lot of people covering the election said number 2, 50% that it was over. Mara, what do you find striking about these poll numbers?
Well, I'm not sure what I make about the outcome. Maybe it just means that it's over. That's subject to interpretation. But what I find striking is just the basic favorable, unfavorable. Donald Trump's favorable is now about his ballot. It should be higher. When you compare him to past presidents at this time, usually you get a bounce after you win. You go.
Usually don't have as much negative coverage either.
That's true, but usually you don't win in such a stunning way. This was a real upset, and you'd think that he'd get a bounce from that. But he didn't. So that's one thing that I think is really interesting. But it has been trending up. So we'll see if that trend continues.
I mean, I think he did bounce. The only thing is he bounced
up
from
to his ballot.
Exactly.
I mean, most people are above their ballot.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, look, there was never going to be a big honeymoon period for the next president, regardless of who won, because these were unpopular people. The number, Bret, you mentioned 59% of Americans saying that they're hopeful moving forward after the election. To me, that's an opportunity for Donald Trump. This has been a very nasty cycle with a lot of strong feelings on all sides, acrimony, bitterness, and yet hopeful is the number one answer from the American people. If he can capture some of that and move forward, he can maybe gain some more political capital, to your point. And the other one, 68% of Americans believe Donald Trump will repeal Obamacare. That has to be a priority.
Jobs, 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 he said in the speech in Wisconsin, Steve, and today he met at Trump Tower with the tech community, a summit in which he said, we'll do anything that you need. Give me a call or give somebody in my administration a call if you have any issues.
Yeah, he said there wasn't a strict chain of command. Call in and we'll take care of you. Look, he's made very clear that he wants jobs to be a priority, and one of the things that we've seen him do early in his pre-presidential period is the PR of jobs. I mean, whether you're talking about Kerry or whether you're talking about meetings like this is showing Americans are going to go home and they're going to see this on their news. They're going to watch shows like this or the networks, and they're going to say Donald Trump is doing something about jobs. Part of the reason he won was because of the things that he said about the economy, showing that he's making progress, that he's actually tuned in to what people's priorities and concerns are. I think will stand him in good stead, as Guy says, to take advantage of that hopefulness.
Next up, the Obama administration takes one final shot at global warming skeptics.
this is an intellectual curiosity expedition. We're really trying to come up with the best solutions to the American people.
This appeared to be a witch hunt. They're sending a message that they want those officials to be looked at, punished, or discarded when it comes to policy.
Policymaking should be guided by science. Policymakers should be listening to scientists, both inside the government and outside the government.
I would hope, based on what I know from this job and what I knew before, that we would still not be having to make the case that climate change is real and that humans have contributed to it.
We want to see sound science. We've seen a lot of the science absolutely start running amok.
Well, the Interior Secretary for the Obama administration, Sally Jewell, did you all know who the Interior Secretary was? Did you? Be honest. That's why when you talk about all these choices in months from now, we will all be asking those questions about the Trump administration. But she was making a final push to imploring scientists to confront so-called climate change deniers. This after the Trump transition team asked the Energy Department's EPA staff to see who was working on the efforts to reduce carbon emissions. We're back with our panel. Charlie, what about this and this final kind of push?
Well, I think it's not a shocking argument to say that a lot of this climate change stuff has become something of a religion on the left, and it's a religion within the EPA and the energy departments. And I think that this is obviously these cabinet people are doing their best to kind of frighten voters about this request for the names and the work of some of these people. But when Trump said, "I think this is a scam for a lot of people to make a lot of money. In the meantime, China's eating our lunch." When he said that before the election, and he won the election, and they knew exactly where he stood on this. And so I think that that people should give Donald Trump some room to make good on these promises.
In the environment community, though, Mara, the Trump nominations so far of Scott Pruitt for EPA Administrator and Rick Perry for Energy Secretary, they frankly scare people.
They do. I think the environmental community takes Donald Trump at his word. He doesn't believe climate change is real. He thinks it's a hoax. He doesn't necessarily believe that CO2 emissions have anything to do with global warming, if global warming is happening at all. And Scott Pruitt seems to agree with him. I don't know about Rick Perry on that particular question. But it sounds like if that's the case, even though Donald Trump has also sent conflicting signals, he says he has an open mind. I mean, I think at some point he has to either decide to accept the 99% consensus of scientists that man-made activity does contribute to it or not. And then he has to make some decisions about the Paris Climate Accord and what he wants to do. I think you can still be for all of the above energy policy and also want to do something about global warming.
Isn't there a nuanced position in between that you want to do something, but you don't want it to kill American businesses?
Yeah, and that's a policy disagreement. And so I think everyone should be in favor of political non-interference when it comes to science. But the problem that I have is that this often is attacked as a phenomenon that only occurs in one direction. It's those right-wing denialists who are manipulating things and ignoring science, and the left, they don't do anything like that, when in fact they do it pretty frequently when it fits their political agenda, whether it's on pipelines or anything like that. And I would commend to our viewers a really good Wall Street Journal op-ed published earlier this month by a scientist at the University of Colorado. It was entitled My Unhappy Life as a Climate Heretic. And this is a man who believes in anthropogenic global warming and climate change. He believes in a carbon tax and supports that remedy for the problem that he sees. His one heresy was he doesn't believe that climate change contributes to an increase in severe weather events. And for that sin, that thought crime, based on evidence that he saw, he's been shunned and shamed and in fact called out by the Obama White House. So this does happen on both ends, and let's not pretend otherwise.
Right. I mean, let's be clear, Steve, that the left, for all the talk about being open and transparent and free thinking and lots of thoughts out there, this is strict. If you are not this way 100%, you are out in the cold, pardon the pun.
No, that's exactly right. And what it does is it has the effect of foreclosing debate. I mean, if it's the case that the science is so clear and that anybody who denies it or even raises questions would be immediately exposed as an idiot, then they should welcome the debate. And too often what they do is they use these names, the denialists, to foreclose a debate. That's exactly the wrong thing to do. You see it from the left quite a bit. That said, the Trump administration, I think, shouldn't have sent this questionnaire. They were smart to disavow it because it looks there like they're trying to foreclose debate.
His talk about this, the president-elect, has evolved from candidate to president-elect. Take a listen.
I think it's a big scam for a lot of people to make a lot of money. In the meantime, China is eating our lunch because they don't partake in all of the rules and regulations that we do.
Where are you on the environment?
I'm still open-minded. Nobody really knows.
So people jumped on him after he said the open-minded thing, but then he turned around. You know, he invited Al Gore and Leo DiCaprio and all these people into Trump Tower to talk to him and everything, and then picked Scott Pruitt. Yeah. So I think that he is open-minded, but that doesn't mean that he's changing his position.
I want to play one more soundbite.
What he says is more important.
One more soundbite is Bill Gates, which has people pulling their hair out that he said this.
In the same way that President Kennedy talked about the space mission and got the country behind that, I think that whether it's education or stopping epidemics, there can be a very upbeat message that his administration is going to organize things, get rid of regulatory barriers, and have American leadership through innovation.
Reference JFK there.
He's got a big fund on this. He's starting big investments into energy innovation.
That is it for the panel.